Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here at ATE in Adelaide and to talking about the China payments ecosystem, which I think is incredibly important. And I think we're going to find not only today is it critically important, but in the years to come, it is going to become even more pertinent for all businesses in this room. Before I get into the content, I'll just quickly give you a little bit of an overview as to who we are. And hang on a sec, technology doesn't seem to be on my side. We are Australia's National Centre for Asia Capability, and we work with businesses across the economy to build the skills, knowledge and insights so that businesses can have a better and more successful outcome in and with Asia. And so we are part of, the government's support role to building capabilities throughout the Australian workforce. So why is this topic so important? Now, we all are familiar with the statistics in terms of China's inbound visitation into Australia and how that composition is broken down. And what we're finding is that obviously a very large portion of this inbound visitation is comprised of this 300 to 350 million plus Chinese middle class, which up until recently has been really, focused on China's eastern seaboard in Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities. But we have consumers that are after these sort of consumption desires. We have tourists that are looking to look better, look more beautiful, to eat better, to have better homes, better lifestyles, more connectivity, having more fun, travelling more as well as part of this, being better educated, and after luxury. And of course, the tourism ecosystem fits nicely and straddles nicely across many of those consumption drivers. And we see that displayed in a lot of traveller behaviour within Australia. The other consistent element to this middle class, to these tourist groups that are predominantly visiting Australia, is the adoption of technology and the digital ecosystems that these travellers and these Chinese consumers live in. Not only is China one of the earliest and most extensive adopters of e-commerce, but also when it comes to mobile payments, Chinese are some of the earliest adopters of some of these technologies, but also some of the broadest adopters. So, and this is supported by figures. And whenever I talk about China is a country of amazing and impressive figures. So I'm going to give you some of those right now. So there are currently over 700 million registered online payment users in China, bearing in mind that there are also over 600 million mobile users in China. So we have some of the largest mobile penetration in the world in the Chinese market. And China currently processes over 380 million mobile payment transactions a day. Now, I'm sure James has some additional stats that are relevant to the UnionPay ecosystem as well, but this is substantial. And this is a snapshot in time. So I think these stats came from one provider. No doubt those figures are already outdated. So we're looking at these figures will have actually be much higher today. And over 70% of Chinese consumers utilise online payments through their smartphones. And so we're seeing a really high usage of online payment, and we are seeing the value of this market in itself quite massive. So in 2016, and again, in the start of Q1 of 2018, these figures will already be much higher. We have the value of mobile payments being up to around $790 billion. So there have been two massive, as I mentioned just then, two evolutions in China that have taken place in the consumer economy. The first is the emergence and adoption of e-commerce, which took place in the mid to late 2000s, and then the emergence and adoption of mass adoption of online and mobile payments. And China is well known for not only embracing new technologies, but really adopting them throughout the economy. But this is not a standalone phenomenon. These payment platforms are linked within mobile ecosystems, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of that as well, that enable services and products to be delivered. And the payment solution itself is only but one part of that. According to some recent statistics as well, is that we're seeing more and more Chinese outbound travellers using mobile payments when they're travelling overseas. And the figure that I have here is 65%, but bearing in mind that we are limited by the actual adoption of, or the ability for these Chinese travellers to access online payments when they're overseas as well. So there is an emergence. And I think one of the comments that Andrew made in his introduction as to why this is important is understanding how your consumer, or how your target traveller consumes, how they behave as a consumer. And I think understanding the prevalence and the extent of digital and mobile payments is very important for you to understand how you can be more customer-centric in your offerings. And just continuing on the adoption of online payments in China and utilising some of these mobile payment platforms. And if we look at 4 core consumer economy value chains, or we look at 4 core sectors, and we look at retail, in all of these 4 sectors, mobile payments are incredibly extensively used. We have, in retail, we have all the way from convenience stores to luxury brand retailers. All of that ecosystem is basically effectively offering mobile payments. If we look at travel, the entire travel ecosystem, the domestic travel ecosystem in China, and then the outbound travel ecosystem, online and mobile payments are widely and universally accepted. Again, when it comes to utilisation of some of these booking engines, when it comes to payment for entertainment, etc., there are a lot of enabling apps and ecosystems from which the consumer will engage with products and services, and the payment platform is actually an enabler to enable that transaction. Dining. There are many social media platforms in China, and WeChat is one of them, where you can search for a restaurant. You can book the restaurant. You can pre-order online. You can pay online. You can sit down, you can send a message, you can let the restaurant know you arrived. You can do everything within some of these app ecosystems. And they are widely adopted not only in Tier 1 cities, but throughout China broadly. And then entertainment as well, not only sort of paying for movie tickets, but going to KTV, going to Shanghai Disney, etc. All of that is widely transacted through mobile payments as well. And I think one of the drivers for Chinese consumers is indeed the convenience. As Andrew mentioned, I want to pay for my coffee, I just pull out my phone. The convenience is incredibly important for Chinese consumers, and a lot of I guess, service and product evolution in China that have come up in recent years is all about providing the consumer with convenience, but also providing the ability for the consumer to split payments. If they're going to a restaurant with friends, that they can automatically split payments between them. It's just all about convenience. So this is a bit of a breakdown in terms of who is utilising mobile payments and how they're utilising it. What we're seeing in China is the emergence of consumers carrying significantly less cash. So if we even look back 10, 15 years ago, China predominantly was a cash-based society. And what we're finding now is that even the amount of people that have less than 100 RMB in their pocket, which is equivalent to about $15, $20, is significantly high. But what we're finding is the average amount of cash that's carried around by Chinese consumers is much lower, and it actually differs by generation as well. We're seeing that the expenditure by people within eastern and northern China utilising mobile payments is incredibly high, higher than other parts of the country. And also, if we look at the inbound visitation figures as they stand today, we also have a significantly large portion of travellers coming from Tier 1 cities. And these Tier 1 cities have a very high, I guess, a penetration of mobile payments within them. If we look at the correlation with these different generations within the Chinese consumer base utilising mobile payments, we can see that the post-1970s generation 55% generally use mobile payments. Post-80s generation, 68%, and post-90s generation is 71%. And certainly what we're seeing with inbound visitation is we're seeing a lot of the FIT travellers are from that post-80s, 90s generation. So when it comes to travelling outbound, as Chinese travellers are doing more and more, what are the drivers and why are consumers preferring to pay with local mobile payment mechanisms? And there was some research done by Nielsen last year which gives some insight into the decision-making drivers or the thought processes of Chinese outbound travellers. And as you can see by this graph here, we have 64% that utilise mobile payments because of convenience, speed and familiarity. Many more Chinese consumers are leading a cashless life. They're after quick and easy, convenient solutions. There's no need to calculate change. And the other thing is that the Chinese consumer believes that these sort of payment solutions are safe. So if I'm going to do a transaction, hopefully there's a dynamic QR code. I need to put in some password, or I need to scan my fingerprint. There are a number of different mechanisms in place which provide that level of security to the consumer. Secondly, and I think this is something certainly that also very much aligns with the work that UnionPay has done, is that Chinese consumers like to use Chinese brands. And I think that didn't always used to be the case, but there is a feeling of pride of using Chinese brands, whether it be payment platforms or other. And it illustrates Chinese innovation, but it also shows that as businesses, we're actually being culturally attuned and we're providing them with the solutions that they're used to dealing with and providing them with seamless consumption environments. And the other is that's relevant to talk about here are things like foreign exchange. And there is the perception, whether real or not, that foreign exchange rates are more favourable when it comes to utilising the mobile platforms that use spot rates on that day. And being very value conscious, as Chinese travellers are, they're willing to spend, and certainly that's illustrated through figures, expenditure figures, but they're very value conscious. So they believe also that that's a much more convenient and cost-effective way to transact. And as I mentioned again, that this is the payment ecosystem in China is very much part of overall consumption, service and product app ecosystems as well. Sorry. Now, where do we stand at the moment when it comes to payment methods used by Chinese travellers? So I mentioned before that during some surveys that were conducted by Nielsen, that 65% of Chinese travellers during their last trip used mobile payments. Now, that doesn't necessarily represent exactly what's happening in this point in time, but if we're looking at a total trip, and according to the statistics, what we're finding is that there is a mix of three payment methods that are traditionally used by Chinese travellers, and that is cash payment, so a mixture of cash payment, bank card payment, and mobile payment. So there is kind of that mix, and there is a slight difference by generation. Now, I didn't put Alipay down there directly just to plug Alipay, but this actually applies to all of these Chinese payment platforms. But the anecdotal evidence through some research that's been conducted is that if there are Chinese payment options available, whether they be the Tencent Pay options, whether they be Alipay or UnionPay, that more Chinese travellers would use them. And out of those Chinese travellers that would actually use those payment platforms, a higher number of those, a higher proportion, have indicated that they would spend more as well. So it's just important to provide the payment ecosystem that Chinese like to engage with and find convenient to also maximise the chance of expenditure as well. Now, I mentioned ecosystems that these apps sit within. Now, I'm going to show you two. This is first a WeChat ecosystem, and the second one is Alibaba, just to give you a little bit of context. if we look at WeChat, WeChat Pay is only a part of the WeChat ecosystem. So WeChat, as many of you have engaged with in your, I guess, your businesses, is a one-stop shop that covers many different apps and many different avenues to consume for Chinese consumers, from education, the payment of tuition payments, to health, to payment of doctor's bills, to information services, to gaming and video. For Alibaba and other organisations, gaming is a big part of the business, to e-commerce, to purchase of daily goods and to purchase of clothing and other products, and also social interactions. And this graph here shows that within the WeChat ecosystem, there are actually 40 super apps that enable services, the provision of services and products across areas of social, finance, transportation, dining, that at the end of the day are underwritten, or underwritten, if you will, by utilisation of these mobile payment software. So this is the situation with WeChat. This is just two examples, and this is the example of Alipay within the Alibaba ecosystem. There are 90 super apps within Alipay. 35 of those are finance. There are 10 that are transportation, and so on and so forth. So, and then obviously they're linked then to the massive e-commerce arm of the Alibaba business as well. So for us to consider these payment platforms, it's incredibly important to understand that these are real enablers to consumption and to business. Okay. This here is just some example of the ways that mobile payments are being adopted within China. So I actually spent, I've been going to China for over 22 years. I lived in China for 17 years. And recently when I've been going back, I've never noticed a time when one particular technology has touched so many different parts of life. So even if we look at the top left corner, whether you travel by bus, whether you travel by metro, mobile payments are very much part of the daily ecosystem. Whether you drive a car and you go through the toll system, mobile payments are integrated into that ecosystem. When you go and shop, not only can you pay by mobile payments, you can pay for your parking just by scanning QR codes. You're buying your groceries, whether it be online or in a physical hypermarket, again, you can scan for promotions and then you can redeem those promotions when you pay through mobile payments at checkout. And then even, hawkers on the road that are selling sweet potatoes, they've got QR codes and you can transact with them in a cashless way as well. So there is a wide adoption. And as many of you are aware, and I know that the other speakers will be talking in more detail about the mechanics of the payment platforms that they are involved with, but it's very much around this QR code ecosystem, and it's quite a safe ecosystem, the dynamic QR code. The merchant will have a small device that scans the QR codes, and they're different according to the different payment providers, and for the provision of purchase of services and goods, and then funds are usually transferred across to the vendors in Australia within 2 days. So that's just a snapshot of how this operates, and you'll hear a little bit more further directly from some of these different payment platforms. I think another thing to raise also is there has been some concern that has been raised about the security issues related to some of these mobile payment platforms and scams that have occurred already within the tourism sector. And of course, any scams that impact, the trust that consumers have with our businesses, but also financially impact us, are devastating. But I think one thing, just to kind of put this into balance a little bit, is that some of the recent scams have not necessarily been to do with the actual payment platform itself, but rather to do with auxiliary sort of environments. For example, there were some fake ticket scams or tickets that were purchased by someone in bulk using stolen credit cards. They were then listed on a social media platform, and then consumers would go onto that social media platform and purchase. It's obviously a real concern. And regardless of whether these scams relate to the platform directly or to social media platforms, it's always important to have the right mitigation factors in place. And obviously part of that is to build a greater awareness of these platforms, make sure that you take the opportunity to engage with the 4 companies that are outside of this room, and also, you know, look at making sure that you are dealing with trusted partners, that you are having, you know, enough communication to your consumers about typical scams that do take place and how that they can avoid them when they're dealing with your product or service. And also working closely with those payment providers to work on risk mitigation factors to make sure that you can minimise chance of any issues taking place. The thing with Union Pay and also with these mobile payment platforms is utilisation of dynamic QR codes, etc., are very, very safe transactions. It's just the ecosystems that surround them that can be the challenge, and it's really important, I guess, to build your awareness, make sure you're dealing with the right sort of companies to minimise any potential risk to make sure this doesn't happen. I need to use my big thumb here to press down on this. All right, so I've given you a little bit of a high-level overview as to why the mobile payments ecosystem is important today. But as I mentioned in the beginning, that in China, the market is changing so quickly. We've even seen the inbound Chinese visitor numbers increase rapidly over a very short space of time. And we're also seeing that the numbers of mobile transactions through utilisation of some of these Chinese mobile platforms is also increasing over 120% per annum. It's very important that we understand that ecosystem and opportunity now, because it's only going to become more prevalent, and it's incredibly important for us to be consumer and customer-centric and Chinese traveller-centric in order to really effectively grow business. So obviously integrating Chinese payment options, those that Chinese consumers like to use, they find it convenient to use, into your business is incredibly important. And then each business is different, and for you to assess what options are going to be right for you, but engage with some of the providers outside and have conversations with them and make your assessment based on that. The other thing is that the utilisation of these payment platforms is a window into growing your interaction with the Chinese digital landscape, to building awareness of your products, to building demand of your products, integrating into the Chinese digital marketing ecosystem, which is going to be also critically important into growing that interaction with the Chinese traveller going forward. So thank you very much, and look forward to your questions later on in the session.